Hey, how's it going, guys? One of my first impressions of Itorah. This is a 2D side-scrolling action platformer developed by Grimbart Tales and published by Assemble Entertainment. It's got a bit of an emphasis on combat, exploration, and oh my god, it looks gorgeous too. Like, look at this. This is admittedly the village area of the game, so it's got the most amount of detail, as you'd expect, but it looks really, really nice. Some animations going on in the background there, even in the foreground. Like, ooh, there's some other stuff too. I can't tell you how many games have, okay, you got a good art direction, you got a good, talented art team working on all these foreground assets and all this stuff, and then they have, like, no background detail, and the game ends up looking kind of hollow and just almost bland. It sucks. Because you can tell, like, in the concept art, and in, like, the trailer material and the marketing material, it looks great, and then you play the game, and then there's just nothing going on. But look at this. Look at this. Look at it. Amazing. It's amazing. Amazing. But how does the gameplay stack up? So, as I've mentioned, this is a 2D action platformer, and it's got some problems. I'll say that. There's nothing about this game that is particularly bad. I'll say that. I think it does three things, and only one of them particularly well. So the first thing we'll talk about is the combat. The combat involves you waving around a big giant stick. And the stick actually talks. He's actually part of the story. Although you don't know much about him. But he's a bit of a wisecracker. You can attack up, down, left, right. Works pretty well. There's a satisfying thunk to hitting stuff. Bad. Good feedback, good sound design. I like it. Unfortunately, it's very simple. You can get abilities later on in the game that let you do different things, like a charge attack, but there's nothing really special here. And unfortunately, the platforming seems to be evolving a lot faster than the combat, and the combat just kind of stays a little stale. It doesn't help that the enemy variety is pretty limited as well. I'm fighting a lot of the same enemies just over and over again, maybe reskinned a little bit. These bloatflies in particular, pervasive throughout the entire game. Not that they're a bad enemy, but they're just, whatever. The combat just in general feels a little lacking. I'm about 3 hours into the game according to Steam, and I'm just not seeing where the appeal is going to come from the combat outside of some very basic attacks, some basic, like, oh, cool, there's a new enemy, and oh, hey, this boss fight's not too bad. But for the most part, it's just kind of whatever. And some of the combat is actually restrictive for the platforming. These areas in particular where enemies are shooting projectiles, you can't really dodge them, and you don't get a whole lot of space to roll unless you're, like, on solid ground here. Like, this part is fine, but there are some areas where, like, approaching one of these things is gonna almost always damage you because you have no real way of stopping it. Like, here is fine. Like, okay, I can just jump over here. But then other times you're, like, trying to fight one on a tiny little platform, and it's almost like you're guaranteed to take damage. So, combat doesn't really service the platforming, and it doesn't service itself either. It's just kind of bland. Not great. There are some boss fights where it's kind of fun, but for the most part, I almost think the game could have just done better without it if they could have done something like that. Just made it a pure platformer. The second point this game focuses on is exploration. Now, this game kind of reminds me a little bit of Dust and Elysian Tale. You've got an open world, you've got the talking protagonist weapon, you've got a very nice art style, but unfortunately, like the combat, it's also kind of lacking. The exploration, like, okay, ooh, this looks pretty big. This is just one area, right? There's multiple areas that are this size or even bigger. But the problem is that a lot of people assume that this game was a Metroidvania because of its size, and, well, it's not. It's a Metroidvania light at best. You get some abilities to backtrack and go to different areas, and, you can get through certain areas that you were not able to get through before. Like, for example, there are wall jumping segments, like here. Like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, I can go to an area I've never been to before. Whoa, and that's fine. Actually, I've been here. But, that's cool. You can do that. Unfortunately, the areas are quite big, and there's just not really anything interesting in them. Because your combat doesn't really evolve, there's nothing really to gather or find. There's no interesting tidbits of lore. The inventory system is mostly, so far, been for just upgrading, like, little scraps. Like, oh, slightly more health, slightly more stamina. It's not great. They're helpful upgrades, but they don't make me want to go out of the way to find them, and I feel like the art style in some areas can get a little repetitive. Although, right now, it's looking great, it's different, but sometimes the forest jungle area could get a little tiresome. it seems like they're recycling a lot of these same bits of textures and just kind of repeating them over and over again, especially for the backgrounds. It still looks good, you know, but I can tell, like, okay, I've seen that pattern of trees before quite a few, you know, times by now, and I don't know, it just doesn't look particularly great in that light. And for exploration in general, there's just no reason to go back to other places. And there's no branching paths, there's no spiderweb level design, there's just nothing. So, combat and exploration are a little underwhelming, to say the least. They're not bad, though. You know, it is fun to run through areas. It is fun to hit stuff from time to time. But for the most part, and thankfully so, you can avoid enemies. You can just kind of blitz through areas and not have to worry about exploring. Because you can just get to the next part of the game, which is the highlight, and that is the platforming. This is the third thing the game does, and this is the thing that the game does well, like really well, and to the point I'd actually recommend it for this reason alone. The platforming in this game is sublime. Now, it's not the most complex, it's not the most feature-rich, but it is stimulating, but also very relaxing. Like, you're noticing right here, it looks just beautiful, you're just kind of going through the motions, right? Ooh, it's very pretty, and then, you know, you're just dodging enemies, and you're having a good time. The controls are perfect. They feel really good. You're not committed to a jump or anything like that. You unlock, you know, various platforming abilities, wall jumping, as I've showed you before, the downward thrust that bounces you off enemies and certain objects. You've got trampolines, you've got all kinds of stuff like that. Again, nothing too crazy, outlandish, or different than what you're probably expecting, but the game is just a joy to play, really. Imagine if Super Meat Boy or Celeste were not super hard games, and instead they just made them, like, kind of easier. That's kind of the impression I'm getting here, but this game handles difficulty in more so like a gauntlet. So in Super Meat Boy or Celeste, you have levels that are very short, right? You have levels that are like, okay, this is going to take me like 30 seconds to complete or a minute to complete, but it's really, really hard. So like one level might take you like 5 minutes to complete because you're dying so many times on one part, right? And then of course you have the added challenge of trying to get all the little extras or hidden bits or bonus items or whatever. But for this game, and I'll actually show you that right now, it has somewhat of a gauntlet vibe going on for it. Alright, so what I've done here is I've loaded up an old area. This is a dungeon, and I'm actually a little bit underpowered in this one compared to my current save slot. I don't have a double jump. I have one less crystal at the top left there, as you might notice. That crystal, by the way, is essentially a health potion. So when you rest at one of these fireplaces, you restore your health and those little pink potions. And your goal is to get to the next one without dying. If you die, you go back to your little fire over here. You basically have to reload your save. Now, there's nothing that'll kill you instantly in this game. There's no instant kill, death trap, or anything like that. But what's going to happen is that these areas, these gauntlets, get longer and longer. The idea is you want to get through them without dying. They'll slowly start to chip away at your health, whether it be through some hazards that you're going to mess up on, some enemies that are going to kill you, what have you. So that's where the game is a little bit different than others. You have this, essentially an adventure platformer, and it works like almost like a gauntlet, where, you know, okay, if you die somewhere within this gauntlet, you're going to have to reload your save, and it kind of sucks. But the game does handle challenge pretty well in that nothing's going to outright really, really frustrate you. It's just going to kind of just throw challenge as you go, and if you're resilient to it, you'll get through it, and it'll be fairly easy. But then you have areas like this, and this game does heighten up the challenge a little bit from time to time, and that's very nice because it is quite engaging. Also, from the story, if you're probably asking, it seems to be interesting. There's some interesting characters. There's, like, some cool plots going on, but it's kind of generic. Like, okay, there's a corruption, and you're the last human, and we gotta figure out where this corruption's coming from, and oh my god, what the hell is that thing? Run away, run away. This is one of the boss encounters in this game. I've encountered 3 of them so far. This is a running boss encounter. I don't know if there's any more like this. The first one I played was actually against a giant spider. You actually had to hit its, I forgot there's no double jump. Anyway, the first one was with a giant spider, and that was fun because you had to hit its legs and knock it over. Second one, you had to do like a bounce jump, downward thrust on its head to knock it over while it was spinning around. That was fun, but it could have been a little better. Wish I had platforms or something like that to liven up the challenge. Again, I feel like the combat in this game just... Like, the platforming gets better and better, and the combat just kind of stays mostly the same. It doesn't really evolve very much. But the platforming, as you can see right here, is pretty engaging. Like, okay, you got stuff coming down from the ceiling, you've got the cool temple, you've got the crazy abomination chasing you. It's fun, it's cool. Like, it's where the visuals and, like, the gameplay kind of shake hands right here. You got a cool temple. Like, okay, it's got the crazy masks, it's got this weird underbelly, like, that's like, oh, what is this? Why does it look like human ruins underneath this Aztec temple, this Aztec-themed temple? It looks great, or mine. I don't know the difference. I don't know my South American, tribe. I know Aztec, and that's about it. Maybe a little bit of Mayan. Anyway. You know, it looks good. You know, there's some backgrounds going on here. You know, you got the spikes, which are very well detailed. And then you have even some light bleed going on over here. Like, oh, okay, cool. And of course you have that giant abomination, which is fairly well detailed and looks nice and colorful. Now, as you're seeing, and I've been meaning to come back to the gameplay on this, as you're seeing, when I'm dying, I'm not going right back to the checkpoint immediately, but I am losing health, so I can lose a little health right here. I'll show you that. See, I lost health, but I didn't get the game over. But when I lose all my health, that's when I get the game over, so we're gonna actually get a heal right here. There we go. I'm making this look easy. It did take me a couple tries to do this when I first played it. Now, the controls are really good, but there is one exception, and that is the wall jumping. It's better if you use the analog stick. I've just switched back to the D-pad right here. The analog stick is way better for the wall jumping for some reason. I don't know why, but it just is. It's something to do with how when you rock the D-pad back and forth, sometimes it can miss an input. Not great. The game does have analog control, so that might explain why, but it is nice to let you use the game, the controls, the D-pad, excuse me. It is nice to let you use that, but I'm just not used to it for these platforming segments, and I really do not like using the D-pad because it's very easy for me personally to accidentally hit down when I'm walking, and then I end up crouching instead of moving forward, which can be a little frustrating. That's my fault, not the game's fault. But I really wish the D-pad was tweaked a little bit more because I hate using it for these segments. This was the only egregious, like, segment where, like, okay, I have to use the stick. The D-pad is feeling worthless right here. It's fine otherwise, and I've switched to the control stick, like, countless times, and it's been fine. Anyway, I think this is a good place to end it. Itorah is a good game, honestly. There's nothing it does particularly bad or horrendous, and for that reason, I can recommend it if you want to play a nice, fun, relaxing 2D platformer. It's got a great art direction, it's got some pretty good sound design. The story seems interesting, but I wouldn't say that's where you're going to have your attention held. This is a platformer, first and foremost, a very good platformer. It controls great, it feels great to play. It's got a lot of variety in terms of platforming, and the art style, as you can see here, is just absolutely gorgeous, and it really helps that vibe of pulling up a warm, comfy blanket over yourself, controller in hand on the couch, just letting the game take you in. It's very nice, very atmospheric. It's just so... It's comfy. It's comfy. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm out.